Okay, welcome to the second episode of what we're calling Season 2 of the MeG Podcast. Bit of different content in this one from the first one, a bit of a mix. We're going to have a historical section, which we will include some sample armies in the way we've done before. In this case, we are going to be looking at the Mongol Great Raid of 1220 to 1223, which will be led by Matt, who is going to give us the benefit of his knowledge on Eastern Europe type areas and the incoming Mongols. Following that, we're going to have a bit of a retrospective and look back at the recent Derventio IV competition that was held in Derby. And we will be, for those who don't yet know, we will answer the question of who performed best out of myself and Matt, because we both participated. And so Richard gets away with that one. He can claim, I would have finished better than both of you. But he was away at the Society of Eights conference, and he might just want to, towards the end, give us an idea of what went on at that conference and whether, because I think some of the talks that were done there might actually give us some ideas for future podcasts and maybe other things, but we'll see how time goes on that. Supporting material for the podcast, including all the lists we're going to discuss today, will be on my blog as usual, and we'll publish the link to that when we put the link up to this podcast when it all goes live. As I said, Matt's going to lead on it. Richard and I will be chipping in about armies to take some of the burden off Matt along the way, and maybe the odd comment as well. So, as I said, because of the way we're structuring it, we're going to sort of interleave some of the army stuff in amongst the historical narrative, just to see how it goes, really. So if people have any feedback on that, whether it works or whether it doesn't, that will be very, very much appreciated. So I'd like to keep things fresh if we can, and also interesting for you, the valued listener. So anyway, without further ado, rather than adieu, it's not end time yet, over to Matt.
Good evening all. Right, well, first off, advance apologies if I mangle any pronunciations. My choice has been to go with modern Mongolian for names, and any straying from that is entirely due to my own ineptitude and incompetence. So basically we have Genghis, Subutai, Ziev, and Chuchai, for examples. So, as I say, any blinding mistakes are entirely my own. So, to start, let's have a quick discussion on sources for this period, for the Great Raid, 1220 to 1223. There are four major, almost primary sources for the Mongols during the Genghis lifetime, and particularly the period around the Great Raid. We have the Secret Histories of the Mongols, which was compiled no later than about 1250 AD. And although it's slightly inconsistent in its treatment of facts, as it seems to be more prone on building a good story rather than a straight history, it's a fairly balanced account from what we can see. The other three major sources all appear to share a common source of details, so may have based on each other or have a lost source that nobody's seen or aware of. The first one is the Collective Chronicles, which is written by a Persian historian called Rashid al-Din. We then have the Yan Shi, which is the official dynastic history of the ruling Mongols in China, which was completed sometime around 1370, so it's quite late. All right, this one takes some saying. Shen Wu Ti Zen Sheng Lu, which is similar to the Secret Histories, but is regarded as a better chronological account and is more detail-oriented. I also think it's a triple word score in Scrabble, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, additionally, for this particular period, there are various Rus chronicles. The Chronicle of Novgorod and Hypatian chronicles are the two significant ones. Beyond that, there's a few other Islamic scholars out there that did a few minor bits, but those are the four that most people use. So having said that, if you pick up any book on Genghis or his military campaigns or his generals, you'll be hard pressed to find any true consistency in the sequence of events or the events themselves or even the participants. It's basically a free-for-all. It's very hard to pin down a consistent narrative. So with that in mind, I've tried to put a balanced view together, but I've also noted a few of the variations as we go through. I've also done a select bibliography of books, which Nick will add to the podcast notes for what I used for this article, in essence. So, the background. To cover Genghis and the Mongol rise to the point of Subutai and Jebe's Great Raid was probably 2 or 3 podcasts on its own, so I'll just set the scene. Genghis had been drawn into the conflicts around the former lands of the Khwarezm Empire. This sits across modern Uzbekistan and points both to the east and west of that. This brought Genghis, in turn, into contact and conflict with the Shah Muhammad of the, got to try and get this right, Khwarezmian Empire. So in about 1218, an accidental, or at least avoidable, pitched battle happened between a flying column of Mongol Tumans under Zhuzhai and Subutai, and they hit an army of the Shah. This basically lit a fuse that by the end of the war saw a merchant caravan that was under the personal protection of Genghis, a series of dead Mongolian envoys, and basically the delivery of a very politely worded note of former conflict, which basically said, "Prepare for war, for I am coming against you with a host you cannot withstand." That was Genghis's polite way of telling the Shah he was in trouble. So the campaign that followed would again be at least a good podcast in length to describe. So to sketch it out, Genghis and his generals launch a multi-pronged campaign that effectively destroys the Khwarezmian Empire, forces the Shah into a prolonged flight that led to his death early 1221. The death of the Shah, though, did very little to reduce the ferocity of the ongoing campaign, and it would take the best part of a decade to subdue the various Khwarezmian leaders and their armies in what became a cauldron of alliances, treachery, and battles. And it turned the Shah's son, Jalal ad-Din, into a, well, take your pick, a notorious brigand or a heroic freedom fighter, depending on which side of the fence you were standing. He inflicted several significant defeats on the Mongols, created and subsequently lost several power bases in his continued resistance against the Mongols. And at that point, it's probably really idea to have a look at the lists for the Khwarezmian Empire.
Okay, and by some strange coincidence, I've been dealt the hand, or did I volunteer for the Khwarezmians? Them being essentially a steppe type Muslim army from what, I think Khwarezmian essentially comes from Khorassanian and such related descriptions of the Transoxus area and northern Iran. So we've got basically a horse army. It's in many ways it's going to look somewhat like the Mongols. However, it does have its nice differences, and certainly within the MeG world, the way the list's been drawn up, it's quite unusual, makes it very interesting. Just as the background stuff, generals are professional. So it is well organized. They were a well organized army. In the period that's being covered by Matt's history here, I'll just pull out the bits that refer to that. Oddly, they can have elephants, and as we know from looking at MeG lists, elephants always at the top of a list. The biggest beasts come first. They can only have 2. They're just normal elephants, tribal loose, protected, shove. But and there must be a question of whether 2 is particularly useful. But there you are. It's an unusual addition to these armies. The main force of the Khwarezmians are what we've called lancers. Now, these are the troops that in many other armies are the armoured horse archers with bow. However, the Khwarezmians were actually quite aggressive, and there's at least one account which talks of them after charging quite vigorously and bloodying their spears. And I think they might have even been to the stage of, say, washing them in a river after the battle. They certainly seem to be a bit more aggressive than, say, the Seljuks who had preceded them. So these are categorized in the list as cavalry formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, charging lancer, shoot and charge. So you see they've got the bow. They're still quality bowmen, not skilled, but perfectly competent bowmen. But instead of having the short spear, they've got charging lancer, and also shoot and charge, which makes them really quite useful when fighting other steppe types. And in the context we're looking at today, Mongols, because the shoot and charge can slow down horse archers. Just a quick explanation: the charging lancer would normally mean you have force charges. However, because of the experienced bow, they don't. And it does mean that they always have to pay to charge. So, bit swings and roundabouts, they're more controllable, but equally you end up paying cards for it. These can be supported by some Iranian Atabeg Askaris, who are your more traditional Iranian Muslim armored horse archers, drilled loose, average protected, experienced bow, short spear. Sorry, I should have said the lancers in the list. It's 8 to 24 of those, so you can have a good chunk. You could have 4 units of 6, for example. You can have a couple of units of the Atabeg Askaris. After that, we go on to Kankali and other horse archers. Your normal form flexible, average unprotected, experienced bow, horse archer, common to the steppe. Unfortunately, from one point of view, you can't make any of these experienced. So again, makes it different. They can have a unit of Khitan Cavalry, drilled loose, average protected, experienced bow, short spear, optional melee expert. So you can bulk out your shooty cavalry types, and they can also fight. The list can have various bits of infantry, including some Kankali foot, who are just tribal loose, average protected, devastating charges. But those who know me will know I'm going to say, but why would you bother? But they are there, and they can have some of those. They can have some skirmishing cavalry, who can be Cantabrian as well, 0 to 12 of those. And they can also have, in the period we're looking at, Persian cavalry, who are similar to the Iranian Atabegs, but don't have the short spear. They're just average protected, experienced bow. Again, they can have some infantry bowmen. Some of them are skirmishers. Some of them are tribal loose. And those can be mounted on camels, as can the skirmish ones. Again, it falls into the not sure why you'd want to. And lastly, in this army, on the steppes here, we've still got a lot of Turks out there. They can have a Turkoman contingent, which would need to be commanded by an allied general, 8 to 32 bases of form flexible, average unprotected, experienced bow, and you can make up to half of these skilled. Sorry, so they are. It's a Iranian Muslim horse army, but with that difference of the main noble type cavalry are charging lancer instead of being your more skirmishy types. And you never know, that could be the reason why they had a long and at times successful fight against the Mongols. Anyway, enough of that. I think it's time to go back to Matt to take up the history once more.
Just to say on that list quickly, it's one of the few lists that has quite a high minimum to it. 2 large blocks of 8 cavalry, but that's by the by. But something I
yes,
noticed.
But I think I'd say they're sort of ones you'd want to take. Although
true.
Yeah, maybe the Kankali horse archers who can't be skilled are the one you go, oh, well, I wish some of them could be skilled. But, you pay your money, take your chance. It's always better to have this variety in lists.
It's also one of the armies that has quite a large block of superior cavalry. So that makes it attractive, I think. It's probably fair to say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one I've sort of got on my list to try sometime. Anyway, sorry, back to Matt.
Yep, sorry, that was me distracting myself from myself. But anyway, right. So, Subutai suggested an incursion around the Caspian Sea to attack the Cuman tribes from an unexpected direction, whilst Zhuzhai approached from the south. The sources suggest that, very much to Subutai's surprise, Genghis, now I'm doing it, released 20,000 men for the purpose and set a 3-year limit on this independent command. Along with Zev, Subutai used the Azerbaijani city of Tabriz as the base for launching this raid. The intent had been to conquer the city, but it surrendered without a fight and handed over a substantial bribe to be left intact. At the same time as moving onto Tabriz, the Mongol commanders supplemented their forces with irregular Turkoman, Kurdish, and other mercenaries. And by early 2021, by early 1221, we're in a position to push into Georgia. And it's probably a good point to talk about the Georgian list. Is that you again, Nick?
Georgian list. Should we talk about the Mongol list first?
Sorry, the Mongol list.
Yes. So I'm going to pick up the thread on that one. So the Mongol Conquest list is the one we're referring to, which is in the Genghis army lists. So this is, as you might expect, a fairly good quality army. Starts off professional generals, although you can have an instinctive nomadic vassal who can command nomadic cavalry. You are on the plains terrain-wise with a mobile camp. But given that you could have an entirely mounted army, you've also got the option of going that way and having a no camp option as well. The best troops, if you want them, are the Khan's Guard. I suppose technically for the raid, because the Khan wasn't present, they probably shouldn't be in the army. They would be drilled loose, exceptional protected, skilled bow, short spear, melee expert. 280 points a base, and dismountable makes them 288. So yes, you're not. You can have 0 to 6 of those. But if you choose all 6, you're not going to have too much left for other things. You can even upgrade those guards for, in the dates that we're talking about from 1218, so they become drill close, exceptional, armored horse protected, experienced bow, short spear, shoot and charge, melee expert. So that actually reduces their points cost to 266. The main thing you lose in doing that is, although you're gaining horse armor, you're losing the ability to evade. Though if you're exceptional, short spear and melee expert, why are you going to bother evading in the first place?
Not to mention the skilled shooting charge.
Well, if you armored horse, you drop to experienced bow.
Oh, do you?
Skilled bow at that point, on the principle that you wouldn't need to be that good at shooting, because you're probably going to flatten anybody you approach. The bulk of the army, however, is the Tomb and Cavalry. They come in 2 flavors. You have armored Tomb and Cavalry, who are drilled loose, superior protected, skilled bow, short spear with optional melee expert, 0 to 18 of those. And then the ordinary Tomb and Cavalry, who are drilled flexible, superior unprotected, skilled bow, short spear with optional melee expert. A positive bargain at 171 points. You then can add, if that wasn't enough, you can add your nomadic cavalry, who are flexible, form flexible, average unprotected, experienced bow, although up to half of those, and you can have up to 36, can be upgraded to skilled bow. Along with that, you can also have some skirmishing cavalry, average unprotected, skilled bow. The Mongol cavalry are all dismountable, should you wish to do so. If cavalry isn't your thing, you can have up to 3 bolt shooters, average unprotected, experienced light artillery. Not quite sure how they fit in with the army, to be honest, but there you go. And then if you want to be really brutal, you can have potentially 2 tugs of unarmed driven civilians who are tribal loose, poor, unprotected, expendables, combat shy, and who have a special rule, which means that if they break, nobody cares.
Apart from their families.
Well, their families might, but nobody in the army.
Who have probably just been killed alongside them, might be.
Yes, one of the more brutal habits of the Mongol army. Take the local population and drive them in front of their own army to act as a sort of human shield. That's something we do not condone in this podcast, it's fair to say. Along with that, we could have a Khitan contingent, which consists of Khitan nobles who are drilled loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear with optional melee expert, 4 to 6 of those, and a Khitan cavalry who are drilled loose, average, protected, experienced bow, short spear with optional melee expert. They have to be in their own contingent. I'll skip the other contingents. They're not valid unless you're in China, or they're not relevant to the raid. I think strictly, I don't think any of the other allies took part in the raid either. You can have Yeochunjin, Korean definitely didn't, they're too late anyway, and the Uyghur allies, I think they may have taken part in some of the attacks against Khwarezmians. That's an Uyghur successor states ally option. So it's a list with quite a lot of flexible variations, not unnaturally given the nature of the Mongol campaigns. So it's plenty of options for skilled bow, plenty of options for superior troops as well. But obviously, if you take all of those and throw in the melee experts, then you're not going to come up with a very big army.
The opening stage of the campaign is the Mongols and their auxiliaries enter Georgia following the path of the Kurai River. Subutai and Jebe scattered their auxiliary forces into raiding groups across the countryside, presumably as a screen for the main Mongol force, but equally to goad the Georgians into a response. So just quickly, the Georgians. The Georgian state was a Christian kingdom that in the first decade of the 13th century under Queen Tamar, or King of Kings as she was more properly titled, had dominated large parts of present-day Azerbaijan, Armenia, Eastern Turkey, and their military might was based on a feudal mix of mounted nobles and retainers supported by a substantial foot levy. Unfortunately, Tamar's son, George IV, wasn't quite the chip off the old block. And while it's credited that he was personally very brave, he really wasn't the caliber of a leader needed to be facing the Mongols, being somewhat enjoying a flamboyant lifestyle is one of the quotes that often turns up. And shall we have a quick discussion on the Georgian lists?
Yes, I think I did get lumped with this one as well. On the grounds one of us had to do 2 armies. Okay, the Georgian army is in the Crusades book, not Genghis like the other ones. And as Matt said, it had actually peaked a little too soon for the Mongol conquest coming in, with a king who wasn't probably really up to scratch. Anyway, to go to the army list, unlike the armies we've just been talking about, the Khwarezmians and the Mongols, the Georgian are instinctive generals rather than professional. The terrain types are standard and mountains. Obviously, the area the Georgians come from are quite mountainous. As Matt just introduced there, the strength of their army is their noble cavalry, who are called Asnori, or some proper pronunciation, because I really have no idea of how to pronounce anything Georgian. So that's a bit of a phonetic one. We're not quite sure how these were armed. I mean, previously they had a reputation of being charging lancers, but it's possible that under the influence of the Seljuks, since Georgia was in existence when the Seljuks burst onto the scene in the Middle East, it's possible that they started to adopt more Seljuk-like tactics. However, the army list provides the option for both. The nobles, we start with it, so you get 2 flavors, and they can be a mix of any of them. The more charging variety is made up of half of the Asnori and half retainers, and the Asnori are formed loose, superior protected, charging lancer, optional melee expert. And the retainers are formed loose, average, unprotected, experienced bow, shoot and charge, and melee expert. There was still quite a tradition of archery in the area, even before the Seljuks arrived. So you've got some charging lancers who can be shot in a bit by the retainers if they're in the second rank. Obviously, if they're only one rank, even though they're experienced, they will go down at colour. But they've got the shoot and charge there, so if they're fighting the step types, they've got the chance of causing slows to catch them, which is also useful. And being melee expert, they can still stand up to fight a bit. The more shooty option replaces the charging lancers with experienced bow, short spear, and the retainers just become experienced bow. They lose the shoot and charge, and they lose the optional melee expert as well. These are 50-50 split units, and you can have 3 to 9 of the Asnuri, and the retainers must be in equal amounts. So you can have basically up to 18 bases of these nobles in whichever configuration you like. So you could have 3 6s, for example. Unfortunately for the list in the period we're looking for, earlier on they could have Frankish mercenaries who are basically charging knights. However, with the fall of the county of Edessa in 1144, they seem to have lost the access to these knights. So at the time the Mongols arrive, they're losing their hard-hitting Frankish mercenaries. They can have a unit of horse archers, form flexible, experienced bow. They can have the same, who are Turkomen, and then they can have a third unit, Turkomen skilled mercenaries, who are, unsurprisingly, skilled archers. However, as Matt alluded to, big chunk of spearmen available to the army, tribal close, average protected, short spear with optional integral shooters, also optionally combat shy if you want to go down that route. Not sure why you would want to in any large scale, but you never know. That's just my view. They can also have a 0 to 16 archers, tribal loose, average protected, which is quite useful, experienced bow, optional combat shy, and they can have some skirmishers, 0 to 18 javelinmen, and then 12 to 24 skirmishing bowmen. So you've got compulsory skirmishing bowmen there. Now the Georgians benefited from being allied to Cumans on a fairly consistent basis. So at this period, you can have a Cumans who you can have 0 to 6 who are formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, short spear, and then 0 to 24 formed flexible, average unprotected, experienced bow, and up to half of those can be skilled. One thing is, whilst they're part of the normal army, the Cumans must be in separate commands, although they can be sub-generals, they're not allied generals. So that's the Georgians as depicted in the megalists, as they stood under their possibly playboy king, thinking back to the glory days of the King of King, the Queen Tamar, as the onrushing Mongol horde of the Great Raid that Richard's just described are coming towards them. And I must admit, on basic army lists, I know which side my money's on. And it ain't the Georgians. Anyway, enough of my ramblings about that. I'm sure Matt will now continue with the meat and drink of the Great Raid.
Thank you. Right. So Subutai and Jebe, once the assembled Georgian field army started responding to their basically hack and slash raid through the countryside, seem to have pulled all their auxiliary forces back as a separate force to the main Mongol troops, and use those to engage the Georgians first. Obviously, you spend your mercenaries before you spend your good troops, and sure enough, the Georgians battered aside these auxiliary forces, but were almost immediately confronted by the intact Mongol troops, who, rather than immediately engaging the Georgians, retreated in good order, as Mongols do, peppering the advanced Georgians with arrows and getting them into some disorder. The description of the battle is what seems to have happened is the Georgians apparently broke on contact when the Mongols were able to rehorse on fresh mounts and launched directed charges on what was now essentially a very spread out force. And at that point, the Mongols withdrew. Sorry, excuse me. So having defeated the Georgian main army, the Mongols then withdrew, returning back to Tabriz. There's a couple of theories on what happened here. Either their rear zones had rebelled. Well, we know some did. Once they returned to Tabriz, they clearly resupplied, restocked. But they also extorted Tabriz for another large cash sum. And by the end of 1221, the raid was back on, but had been delayed by almost 9 months. At this point, they returned to Georgia. And again, they face a Georgian army in the field. And it was brought to ground on, according to the sources, Subutai had marked earlier on in the year as a suitable place for what he had in mind. And basically what happened was the Georgians advanced in what is described as a disciplined mass. Up until the point, they got ambushed by a detached force led by Zev, who hit them in the rear with about 5,000 heavy cavalry. And at which point, the main force under Subutai turned around and hit them on what was their new rear, effectively. Inevitable rout. The Georgian army is destroyed as a field force. But it also set the scene for the loss of their capital, Tbilisi, in 1226 by Jalaluddin, who took the opportunity that there were no significant Georgian forces left to grab the capital as a new power base to face the Mongols. So the army's destroyed. The king is severely wounded, apparently, according to the sources, because he dies a couple of years later. But the odd thing is, as far as the Georgians were concerned, they were reeling from this blow, and the Mongols just disappeared. They just went. Sorry, I'm just going to digress slightly. It's worth noting that this confrontation with the main Georgian army is somewhat murky, because accounts range from there being a single battle in late 1221, or two battles, which is what I've described here, the early and the late, undecided which one it is. Simply because there are a lot of similarities between the two, and none of the sources give you any kind of consistent feel for what happened. My personal opinion is I think there were two battles, because the effect on Georgia was so significant that it just could not recover. And although the later battle happened almost in winter, kind of implies that it was a lot smaller force than the first one. But anyway, so whichever way it works, having crushed Georgia, the Mongols disappear into the night effectively. And where they've headed is they've headed north up towards the Caspian Sea, well, northeast. And they reach the fortified city of Derbent, which is between the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea, on a very narrow, less than a kilometer from the foothills to the sea itself. And it is very heavily fortified. It was one of the original outposts of the Sassanid Empire at one point, and it had huge fortifications. The implication is that Subutai's forces just did not have enough siege equipment all the time to batter their way through these walls. There are, again, somewhat murky sources. The best we can say is the Mongols got themselves into a really rather nasty mountain trek using local guides or forced local guides from Derbent. They basically said, give us guides to get us away from your city and, we'll go away. The Chinese sources particularly say that it was snow-covered passes. They took casualties, lost their siege train. There's an argument that they didn't have a siege train, which is one of the reasons they didn't try to take the city. Arrive on the other side of the mountains, straight into the face of a Kipchak and Alan army that was waiting for them at the other side of the pass. Again, the sources imply that the Derbent governor basically sent messages by a much easier route to say, by the way, there's a Mongol army coming, you might want to do something about it, because we can't. The primary source for this basically says that the Mongols immediately tried to break out, but were forced back into the foothills after a particularly bloody battle. It was resolved in typical Mongol fashion. They went to the Kipchaks and said, here's a massive amount of gold. Why don't you join us or go away? And sure enough, we're not quite sure which one they chose, but either way, the Alans were isolated, and sufficiently isolated that the remaining Mongol forces were able to overwhelm them relatively easily in a pitched battle. Rather than concentrating on dealing with the remaining Alan territory, the Mongols split up and actually hunted down the Kipchak clans that they bribed and took back all their money, basically slaves, gold, horses, the works. What this caused was a lot of refugees started fleeing north and to the west to their fellow Cuman tribe allies and retreated to them and into the Rus principalities. At this point, it all goes a bit to the left, and I mean that quite literally. The entire Mongol force took a massive detour into the Crimean Peninsula and sacked the settlement of Soldai. Why? Nobody's quite sure. Now, there are various theories that have been put forward. The one that seems to have quite a lot of popular traction is that Subutai actually did some negotiations with Venetian traders for intelligence on the surrounding area. And part of that deal was, could you go and destroy the city? Because allegedly it was a Genoese colony. Yeah, that's a bit tenuous for various reasons. There is a reason why it exists, because later on, the Doge of Venice and the Mongol Empire did have a series of semi-secret treaties, because the Mongols felt the Venetians were far more biddable, shall we say, than the Genoese traders. Anyway, so there's little direct cited evidence for Venetian and Mongol cooperation at this time during the raid, particularly as it's much more likely that this settlement, Soldai, was actually under the control of the Byzantine rump state of Trebizond, or possibly even the Seljuk Turks, who were the Seljuks of Rum, who were also having a slight war with Trebizond at the time. So, whatever the reason, they sacked.
Can I give you my theory?
Yes, please do.
My theory is the Mongols, basically doing the usual Mongol thing, tried to extort some money out of the city. The city refused, and the Mongols attacked and burnt it. The simplest solutions are usually the right ones, in my opinion. There's no primary source to support that, but it just seems to me you can invent elaborate theories and actually overlook the blatantly obvious, personally.
No, that totally fits. I mean, I'm not a great fan of the Venetian theory, and as I say, the main oddity is that, you know, to get to it, you actually have to go all the way through the Crimean Peninsula, all the way up and all the way down. So it was quite a detour from what their original the plan was. But I do like that. Yes, basically they went for the money, which is fair enough. So having sacked Soldai, the Mongol forces split. Subutai took a raiding force along the coast of the Sea of Azov, basically creating a wasteland behind them, destroying towns, sacking them, burning them, you know, looting as he went, basically securing a rear area as far as everybody could tell for future Mongol advance. Zev took a force towards the Don, where he started harassing the Kipchak clans that had been moving west after their set to down by the Caspian Sea. At some point during that run by Zev, he take your pick, co-opted, hired, or otherwise persuaded the chief of the Brodnik tribe to add 5,000 mounted riders, to the Mongol forces. And whilst moving back towards Subutai, they received news that the Rus principalities were forming an anti-Mongol alliance. This seems to have come about, though how accurate the sources is there's one of the fleeing Cuman Kipchak chieftains, somebody who's recorded in the sources is called Khotan, had appealed to his father-in-law, the Rus prince Missilov of Galicia, for assistance against the Mongols. Now, the Rus Kipchak Cuman relations, shall we say, has pretty much been hostile for about 200 years to this point. They fought over the same lands. Cuman raids were pretty consistent, But what is also consistent is Rus had how do I put this politely? They had a passion for human women, so would often marry into the chieftain families because of a reputation for great beauty and strength of character and so on. So this is why Khotan ends up being allied to the Prince of Galicia. So there was a fairly strong feeling among many of the Rus princes that they should just leave the Kipchaks to their fate. After all, they've been raiding them for years. So this goes on for a while, apparently. But a princely council was called at Kiev, where an accord was apparently struck with some 18 Rus princes forming this alliance to head off this new nomad incursion. The precise reasons of why they decide they're going to do it is not made clear. I'm going to guess they probably went with the better the devil you know than somebody who's just beaten them up. So anyway, the leading players in this alliance were 3 princes. Rather annoyingly, they're all called Mstislav. Every single one of them. And they're the princes of Galicia, Kiev, and Chernigov, which is fine, except what you find in the Rus chronicles, they only refer to Mstislav, not Mstislav of Kiev or Chernigov or Galicia. So you actually have no idea which one they're talking about unless there's a fairly strong context given. So anyway, so the 3 Mstislavs, I'm assuming they formed a band at some point with a name like that. Anyway, sorry. They're the leading players and they provide substantial forces. Now Galicia is the furthest away. And there is actually a note in the chronicles that they actually sent their cavalry across land to a muster point and sent their infantry by ship down the Crimea and up the Dnieper. The chronicles state there was over 1,000 ships, which I'm kind of figuring that you don't need a pretty damn big river to get 1,000 ships up it, but in one go from one principality. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing here. So by April 1223, the Rus forces are starting to converge, assembling to the south of their territories. Actually, they're actually assembling more in the Cuman zone than in the Kipchak zone than they are their own. And at that point, it's probably a good time for me to talk about the Rus list. So the early Russian lists. So I'm going to just dive off into.
Yeah, that'd be great, Matt. I think you mentioned they got the cavalry, obviously cavalry infantry. Well,
yes.
Have that. So you tell us a bit more about how Meg has represented these anyway. So yes. To round out the protagonists in the Great Raid.
Absolutely right. So for those that have listened to the previous podcast, they would have heard me waxing lyrical about the early Russians as I'd use them in a tournament, but for the purposes of the Great Raid. So early Russian, they're instinctive generals. They can have 3 subordinate generals and 2 internal allies. Their terrain is standard and forest. They're unfortified or fortified, poor or average camp, the usual spread. Now, the backbone of their forces are the noble cavalry and retainers, which are formed, loose, superior, protected, short spear, optional melee expert, and you can have up to 18 of those. They are supported by another block of 18 of average cavalry, otherwise identical, form, loose, average, protected, short spear, melee expert. They can have mercenary Germans. At this date, they would be formed, loose, fully armored, average, charging lancer, dev charger, with an optional dismount, up to 6 of those. Polish cavalry, which are formed, loose, superior, protected, short spear, melee expert, basically the same as the nobles. Probably not relevant to the Great Raid. I suspect they're probably a later arrival, probably when the Mongols actually arrived to Conquest in the area. But right, so the next large bulk of forces for them are mercenary Turks and pensionegs, which are formed, flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow, up to 24 of those, and up to half of those can be upgraded to skilled bow. Lithuanian cavalry, probably the same reason the Polish cavalry in the list, they are formed, flexible, average, unprotected, unskilled javelin, short spear, melee expert, shoot and charge, dismantable, and you have 6 of those. Then you get the infantry. There's two types. There's the polk spearmen, which are formed close, average protected, short spear, shield wall, integrated shooters, which is optional. 8 to 48 of those. And then there's the smedi spearmen, who are tribal close, poor, unprotected, short spear, shield wall, optional, integral shooters, up to 40 of those. Basically, I'm your more experienced levy and the dregs is the way I'm going to go with that. You can have some skirmishing Hungarian light horse, average unprotected experienced bow combat shy, up to 6 of those, and up to 18 skirmishing foot archers, which are infantry skirmishers, average unprotected experienced bow combat shy. An assortment of allies. The only one that is relevant is the Kipchak ally, which is it's a mix of nobles and light horse, but that's an external ally. If I was to do this list for the Great Raid, I would be using an instinctive general and 1 sub-general and 2 allied generals. It would hamper the list something horrible, but that would be the best representation for the forces that are about to be a raid. That's it. That's basically the list.
And we'll come to a sample list later.
Indeed. Right. So.
Okay. Afraid it's still more of your talking, isn't it?
It is indeed. No, that's absolutely fine. I was just trying to locate where I'd lost myself.
Do appreciate how much you're putting into this, Matt. I think because it's quite complicated. There's a lot of history here. So anyway, I'll let you get on with it.
No. I always believe enthusiasm's the way forward, even if intelligence isn't. So anyway, my enthusiasm can do right. So in keeping with usual Mongol diplomacy to separate and conquer, Subutai sent envoys to the Russian princes and basically said, our grievances are with the Kipchaks and are not with you. The princes, in keeping with most Mongol enemies, immediately killed the envoys and continued with their muster. Anyway, so the muster point was an island near Korteza, which was located in the lower Dnieper. There's no consistent numbers given for the size of the muster. Now, there's a Russian historian that's postulated it was as low as 8,000. But the normal figure seems to be around 80,000, which strikes me as extreme in number. A mixture of cavalry and foot is the general impression given. But it also contained the entire Kipchak nation, and that being those that had fled from the earlier fights, all under Khotan. So the Mongols' response to the death of their envoys is to send another envoy, basically informing the Russian princes that they accept the death of their previous envoys as an act of war. The Russian princes this time let the new envoy leave. They obviously, twigged that it was probably not the best idea to kill another one. So, at or near the muster point on the Dnieper, a force of some 1,000 Mongols was attacked by Mstislav of Galicia's Rus and the Kipchaks. This force is annihilated and prompts a general advance of the Rus army. This 1,000-man force of Mongols is variously described as a rearguard, a supply column, as the Rus chroniclers say, large numbers of cattle were captured, or it may even have just been a scouting force. One historian has gone so far as to suggest that this particular element of the story actually masks the death of Ziev, as he was allegedly its leader. It's an interesting twist on the tale. The upcoming battle between the Mongols, the Rus, and their Kipchak allies is usually known as the Battle of Kalka River. But it is known as the Battle of Kalka River. There's no denying that's what it's known as. That's the one fact that actually comes out of this. That's what everybody calls it.
We have an actual historical fact that we can be reasonably certain about.
Yes. Unfortunately, the fact is that's what they've called it. There is some debate whether that was actually the river, which sends you off on a different tangent. But anyway, so yes, the Kalka River. There are very few sources for this, and they contradict each other, which is about normal for this particular area and period. So what can be gleaned? The actual battle is fought over the river Kalka or one of its subsidiary tributaries. Subutai and the majority of the Mongols are on the eastern side of this river with an advance guard on the western bank. The battle opens with the Rus vanguard clashing with the Mongol advance guard on the western side of the river. And the Mongols are either driven back over the river or withdraw over the river. Now, it's worth noting at this point that we're using the word river, yet throughout all the accounts, both sides seem to be able to cross this river with relative impunity. It doesn't seem to have impeded them particularly noticeably. It may be a more stream or anyway. So the elements of the Rus forces and the Kipchaks cross following the Mongol advance guard. Now, some elements stop to erect a camp. That's quite clear from the available sources that a camp is being built. The Kipchak go forward, presumably scouting to establish where the Mongol forces are. The other Rus princes start crossing the river, but are strung out on the approach to the river. It appears at this juncture that Subutai launches an immediate strong cavalry attack on the Kipchak forward units, pushing them or routing them back into the Rus near the river. Now, the Persian scholar Ibn al-Athir and the Rus sources, primarily the Chronicle of Novgorod, make it quite clear that the Rus forces already across the river, despite being disordered and ill-prepared, were able to counterattack the Mongols and hold them long enough for other Rus troops to cross and reinforce the line. In fact, the chronicler almost gives the impression that the Rus troops were not in their armor; they were setting camp. They were sufficiently disordered that they went into the line totally ill-prepared. And at that point, so they'd stopped the Mongols, but additional Mongol units then swung the balance, presumably a reserve. And at this juncture, what sources there are agree a general rout ensues, with the Mongols conducting a pursuit back as far as the Dnieper River. Of note is that the Kievan contingent is said to either formed a wagon lager on the Kalka and eventually been overwhelmed and massacred, or they managed an ordered retreat back to the Dnieper, where they formed a defensive wagon lager and were then overwhelmed. The aftermath of the battle is Jebe, who I'm pretty sure is still alive at this point, and Subutai sack a series of towns along the Dnieper and then head back into the eastern plains to rest and resupply. There seems to be an implication that they also spend their time gathering intelligence on the area, because they don't take the most direct eastward route to link up with Zhuzhai and his forces, and instead they end up heading northeast into the territories of the Bulgars. Try and say that fast. Again, going with Richard's theory, it's said they were a wealthy and prosperous land, so there's probably money involved here somewhere, or loot.
Follow the money.
Follow the money, exactly. And to paraphrase the secret histories of the Mongols, Subutai was discomforted by these people.
Ooh.
Yes, and that's about as far as all the sources go. But it seems that the pair of them suffered some kind of reverse. The supposition is the Mongol vanguard was ambushed and severely damaged. And it's possible that at this point, Jebe was wounded or killed, rather than earlier against the Rus. As a consequence, or part of a concerted action, Zhuzhai's forces have to join with Subutai's to complete what was officially the actual mission, which was to subdue the Kipchak tribes in the area. So a supporting column from Zhuzhai joins with Subutai, and they successfully crush. They're described as rebels, so the assumption is they had made some sort of agreement with the Mongols, and then decided that once they got their nose bloodied by the Bulgars, thought actually now's the time to have a go at it. They got it wrong. They were destroyed, apparently, quite brutally, and then a series of free Kipchak settlements on the Volga were also destroyed. And at that point, Mongol troops consolidated and returned to the main Mongol army, where Subutai and Jebe are immensely feted by Genghis for the campaign. Jebe is one of his sons that throughout the histories he and his father had a bit of a tempestuous relationship.
So at this point, the Mongols have been away from Genghis for 3 years.
Yep, 3 years. They've covered.
I just find this is an astonishing thing that I can't think of any other armies of the period, or most of the ancient and medieval period that we cover in Meg, where somebody would commit tens of thousands of troops to go off on this huge independent long distance, almost without boundaries raid, and say, see you in 3 years.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I mean, the total in kilometers is something like 6,500. And given that the original aim was, I say, just to loop around the Caspian Sea and fall on the Kipchaks on the other side, they actually went far further north, and went on a particularly spectacular jolly. I mean, I suppose the closest you get classically wise would possibly be Hannibal and his Italy campaigns, where he marched all the way through Spain and up the top, but it doesn't even come close to this one. So it's a stunning achievement. The numbers that are apparent in their return is a bit nebulous, shall we say, but the conventional wisdom is they lost something like 60% of their troops.
Right. Yeah.
They also lost 2/3 of the senior command, apparently. 2 out of 3 of the generals that were under Subutai died. So I'm guessing it was probably the Tomb and commanders.
Yeah.
So yeah, they took a batter in doing it, but yeah. But they were significantly fated. I mean, yeah. Genghis gave them one hell of a party when they got back.
But still, it's just a completely different way of waging war, isn't it? Pretty much everybody else is still in relatively seasonal campaigns over much shorter distances.
Yes, because I mean, the Georgian, the late Georgian battle was fought in the middle of winter, and again, the one when they fought the Kipchaks and the Alans around the Caspian Sea, again, that was over January period. So
It's quite astonishing. Anyway, Matt, that's been brilliant. I was sort of aware of this raid, but the sort of details and just how far they went, like 6,500 kilometers, is new. But shall we move on to army lists? We've teased the listener with the details from the PDFs, so perhaps we should now put our armies for each of them before the jury, to see what people say. Would that seem okay with everybody?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, I'll, in the same order we did it through your history, Matt, shall I start off with the Khwarezmians? Okay, so I've gone for a command structure of 3 competent professional generals and a competent instinctive ally for Turkmen. Remember, there was a Turkmen contingent allowed. So I've got 12 cards there. This gives me a PBS of 8 and a scouting of 6, which is very nice. The whole army turns out to be mounted, but I haven't gone for the option of no camp. Got a poor unfortified camp. I've gone for 3 units of 6 bases of the Lancers, the formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, charging Lancer, shoot and charge. That's my big punch for this army. Though people who keep track of my armies, somebody out there might have twigged that I do quite like the idea of 3 units that are decently fighting capable in my shooty cavalry armies. So there they are. I've gone for the minimum of 8 bases of the Kankley horse archers, form flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow in 2 4s. They're just going to nip around and snipe and maybe try and get on flanks. I've then gone for a 6 of the same as well, just to give the other 2 something to work around. So we've got 1 unit that can stand up a bit more, is a bit less fragile, and could be the one advanced to take some shooting. And certainly in the context of the Great Raid, where there is a Mongol army out there which is just full of skilled shooters, something that can last a reasonable amount of time has got to be good. I also put in a unit, the Persian Cavalry, formed loose, average protected, experienced bow. Yeah, they're there really because they're another shooting, but they're protected, so it just helps. 2 units of Turkmen, again 6 bases, 1 experienced bow, 1 skilled bow. So worked a little bit of skilled in. It's not an army that gets a lot of skilled. And then 2 units of 6 bases of Kankali skirmishers, cavalry, skirmisher, average unprotected, experienced bow, Cantabrian combat shy. Just gives another 4 files, hopefully, of people who can shoot as if skilled. So possibility of 7 files of skilled shooters in there. Not the big massive amount that some of my other shooty cavalry armies have, but you know, could work well. And then you're hoping to obviously prepare the way to insert those 3 units of lancers into the enemy. And again, talking the context of this one, if you are, say, fighting the Mongols, you hope the shoot and charge will affect them. And then if those lancers can get in, they should hopefully be able to rip a decent size hole in the opponent. So that's it. You know, I'm not going to claim this is a big and clever army, but those lancers are a bit different, as I said earlier, and I think can give other shooty cavalry armies a bit of hard time. And against other armies, the fact they are experienced bow and don't have to charge, despite the charging lancer, does give you options. So in case I didn't mention it, the 2 Turkmen units are an allied contingent under the competent instinctive general. Competent, yeah, I think this army could stand that being. Hesitant, if you just drew black and whites at the beginning, make life difficult, but I don't think it's terminal if you do. So that's my offering. Don't know what people think of that one, other than it's another cavalry army from Nick.
I was going to say it's a very Nick cavalry army. Would be my reaction. I think I wouldn't particularly fancy if it was a themed competition around the Great Raid. I think it should do reasonably well. Would be my reaction.
Mine would be the same, and given how much difficulty that army historically gave the Mongols, I'd expect it to do well as well.
Yeah, I mean those lancers, because they're superior. Obviously, the Mongols have lots of skilled shooters, but they're not going to be shooting at them on greens. And then the shoot and charge can hopefully cause slows, so you're forcing the Mongols to hopefully run away more than they want to. And if you do catch them, it's going to be quite painful for the Mongols, hopefully. Yeah, I did find doing this one, the army, I felt it sort of wrote itself in a way. I'm not sure I can see much of an alternative to this sort of approach in the list. But on the other hand, I do think it's quite competent. Well, on that vote of confidence, Richard was next in line with the aforementioned Mongols.
Mongols, yes. So I have picked an army which probably wouldn't do very well against yours. So my Mongol Conquest army was 3 competent professional generals and then a talented, instinctive, nomadic vassal ally. I basically went for units of 4, which would need very careful playing, but this allowed me to go for 11 tugs and 2 skirmishing sugs of 6. It's only got 1 protected unit. That's of armoured Tomb and Cavalry, protected skilled bow, short spear, dismountable because the points gave the option to do so. Along with that, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units of Tomb and Cavalry, drilled flexible, downgraded to average, unprotected, but skilled bow, short spear. And one of them gets dismountable again just because the points allowed for it. The nomadic cavalry component is essentially 4 units of full flexible average unprotected cavalry, 2 experienced bow and 2 skilled bow, and as I mentioned, 2 units of skirmishers. With a poor mobile camp, It comes out at 9998 points because of the dismounting. Actually, I gave the skirmishing cavalry dismountable as well. The dismountable does potentially give a bit of option if there's some terrain, although this is probably not an army that's going to be taking advantage of that, I guess. 8 PBS, 7 scouting. So you're probably not going to be short of scouting cards. Remembering you can only ever take the best 5 of your scouting cards. That's a rule people sometimes forget. Yeah, it's slippery, but because you've got all those cavalry being unprotected and in 4s, it's great against opponents that can't shoot back. It's going to need very careful handling against opponents who can. So it might struggle in a great raid competition, to be honest. But there you go. That was my option.
I think it's worth noting that those 2 skirmishing cavalry are also skilled bow.
Yes.
Which is nice. Expensive, but nice. I mean, you have to worry a bit less about them being shot at, unless the opponent get very close to them. So I think it gives you some a little tweak there that you can work with. It's one of those. I've had, whenever I've looked at the Mongols, I end up with something that is going to be somewhat similar to this. You end up with a lot of 4s of the unprotecteds because they're expensive. You know, they're not cheap troops because they're drilled, skilled bow, short spear. You know, it adds up. It's an army for the brave and the competent.
Yeah, I think there are probably a few more interesting options, but they weren't relevant to the Great Raid, really. So that's my Great Raid army anyway.
Certainly not one that wants to be fighting in hand-to-hand until the enemy is really in its really short pieces.
Any coincidence to my Mitanni army is an accident.
I don't. Who was going to mention that? But whatever you say about the unprotected, with that many skilled bow, it will always worry people, and because you just need that round where you just get a great set of shooting dice, and suddenly the opponent's going, "Where's my front rank gone?"
Yeah, there was a unit here a minute ago.
Yeah, and with the 11 tugs and 2 sugs, opposing armies are going to struggle with flanks and that sort of thing. You have to be patient, avoid contact wherever possible, work around those flanks, and once you do get the hole, it's amazing how much fun you can have.
Yes. I think in a very Mongol way, you then exploit it mercilessly, don't you?
That's the trick, yes.
Yeah. So, excuse me. I suppose in the order it was back to me, wasn't it, with Georgian? Okay, this one, I'm going to defy you to say this is a Nick type army. So it's Georgian army, again, of the period of the Great Raid. Unlike the previous 2, this has got instinctive generals. I've gone for a legendary instinctive CNC and 3 competent instinctive sub-generals. And I hardly ever use legendary generals, but it just appealed to me on this one. Although Matt might want to suggest that the Playboy King of Georgia possibly shouldn't be allowed to be legendary.
Depends on what he's legendary for.
I like that answer. I like that answer a lot. I'll hold on to that. He was riding at the front, drinking away, shouting, "Remember my mother," or something.
Something along those lines. Yeah, it's an image to play with.
Yes, actually, we probably better not go down that one too. Yeah.
A legendary commander can still draw 5 black cards.
Now there's an encouraging thought, if ever there was one. Anyway, this gives a PBS of 7 and a scouting of 4. because of the troops I've got in the army. But a lot of that comes from the legendary general. There's a poor, flexible camp. It was interesting when I knocked this up and I thought, oh, flexible camp. I think that's one that tends to get overlooked a bit. It isn't that expensive, and if you're defending, you get a fortified camp. So
I like flexible camps.
Yeah, it's one I'm squirrel away for armies that might be able to have it, to keep an eye open for that. Anyway, I've gone for 3 units of the Asnure and retainers. One of them I've gone with the charging lancer melee expert option I discussed earlier. The other 2 are the experienced bow short spear versions, so more like step cavalry. Thinking of that one is partly thinking about the way I play. But also thinking, well, the legendary general can lead that charging lancer unit at some point in the game to hopefully knock a decisive hole somewhere. So there's another reason for the legendary general. Although they've got charging lancers in that unit, only half the unit is charging lancers and superior, so it's got to make a hole fairly quickly. So that's 3 units of those, each of them 3 bases of the Asnure, 3 bases of the retainers. Gone for a 4 base unit of Turkomen mercenaries, average unprotected experienced bow, and a 6 base unit of the skilled versions you can have. Gives a little bit of mobile shooting power, and indeed 6. I've then gone for 4 units of the spearmen. An 8, let's count up, 2 8s, 2 6s. I prefer them all to be 8s, but points got in the way. These are tribal close, average protected short spear. So they're just a big load of stodge. One of the 6s is poor and combat shy. Again, that's just a points thing to get me to 11 tugs. That will stay out of the way. So you've got 3 units of stodge there that are just going to occupy space and occupy the opponents, while the more mobile cavalry play around and we tee up the charging lancer Asnure. I went for 2 8s of the archers, who are average protected, experienced bow. I think they're quite nice being protected, and again, in the context of this great raid thing, I think they could be very useful. I've then gone for 4 units of the skirmishing archers. Remember, you've got a minimum on these, 12 to 24. I've gone for all 24. 4 6s. One of them's poor, the other 3 are average, and they're all experienced bow. So across the army, you can put out a fair amount of shooting power. And it just crossed my mind that with the tribal close spearmen being stodge and potentially a target for things like Richard's skilled shooting Mongols, if you put those skirmishing archers in front of them, which they can always push along, it can really upset their day. Or, of course, they can go and play and sit in terrain. So I suppose I have to admit, whilst it's not, if you like, a Nick army, it's got some Nick bits in it, because it does have some skirmishy shooty cavalry and it's got other bowmen. But I would claim here it's not one of my normal armies. But I think it could be quite interesting to play, certainly in this theme we're talking about. But again, I would love your views on this.
Just to mention, putting the skirmishing archers in front of the spearmen, the only thing you have to worry about is if the enemy moves to force the archers back.
Yes.
By the pushback, because then your spearmen are going to be left with little option but to be charging cavalry, which is, if it's a case of skilled bow, would be painful for them in 6s anyway.
Yeah, that's a very valid point.
To be doing that kind of tactic, your flex are going to have to be in loose order, aren't they? So you're not running away as fast either, and he's got a fair amount of cavalry there, so it might be a trap.
Yeah, well, I think whether the cavalry could do it, it would also depend on where you'd put the 2 blocks of 8 archers as well, because if they're intermixed with the spearmen.
Yeah, but if the cavalry are close to the spearmen, then I would be looking to get around those flanks and stuff. So Yeah.
With your Mitanni? Sorry, I mean your Mongol Conquest.
With my Mongol Conquest.
No, I think it's a very, very good point, Richard. You can put those archers out front and think, oh, that'll keep the Mongol cavalry away, and suddenly go, oh, hang on, my archers are now sitting behind my spearmen, who are going to be shot at by these skilled shooters. So yeah, I think it's certainly not a foolproof way of either defending the spearmen or shooting at the cavalry.
Yeah, my feeling is that this army falls between two stools. That it's the spearman means that it doesn't quite have as much cavalry power as some of the other armies, and yet what are the 4 blocks of spearmen actually offering you?
To some degree, tugs that use points. There isn't actually that much left you can take in the list, especially if you're doing it within the context of the Great Raid.
Yeah, I guess that's your problem drawing up the list.
Yeah, it's not as I said. I think it could be. It's just when I say it could be interesting to try it. I don't think it'd be a take it to a competition. Try it. It'd be have the old friendly game with it.
I think I'd be hoping my legendary general rolled a good skull at the opening dice roll, and I think it's an army I'd look to use in the mountains personally.
Oh yes, I quite agree with you on that. Yes, and then if you could then roll a skull in his first combat as well, and well, actually, just every combat thereafter would be useful. But
on the principle that I'd be avoiding combat wherever possible, yeah. Hopefully, the skull you're rolling into your first combat is in about the 10th turn of the game.
It'll compensate for the 5 turns of all black cards you get with the legendary general Georgia.
Yeah, he's had all black cards, and he's sitting there going, "Why am I surrounded by Mongols?" So yeah, it was. Yeah, so it was a somewhat. I did feel when drawing it up, it was somewhat limited by the options that we'd set ourselves. So it's. But that makes it quite interesting in that respect. Well, perhaps we should now ask Matt, because we got somebody who's got an army he has actually used.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? It's right. I'm going to have to admit that I immediately did not follow my own recommendation that if I was going to do this for real, I'd take 2 internal Russian allied generals, because frankly the list was not going to work if I did that, to be blunt. But so I've ignored my own advice. So what I've gone with is a talented, instinctive army commander, a talented, instinctive Kipchak ally, a competent, instinctive sub, and a mediocre sub. I've ended up with PBS cards of 7 and scouting of 6, so not bad. They're probably going to lose to the Mongols, but so it's only a break of 5. But you could get it to 11 if you and the Richard route of blocks of 4. But I felt the solidity of bigger units was probably more realistic for what I was going to try and achieve with this army if we were running this as a Great Raid theme. So what I've gone with is 3 units of the Noble Cavalry, which are formed, loose, superior, protected, short spear, melee expert, 3 blocks of 6. I've taken a Lithuanian cavalry unit. To be fair, you could probably just swap that straight with a standard Russian cavalry average unit. But for the purposes of this, I took the Lithuanians. So their cavalry formed flex, average, unprotected, unskilled javelin, short spear, shoot charge, melee expert. I took the minimum spearman of the Polk spearmen, which was a block of 8, which I downgraded to poor, protected, short spear, shield wall, integral shooters, simply because I don't think the infantry had any significant impact on the very short campaign in the Battle of the Kalka River. There just seems no reasonable justification to think the infantry even got involved, other than at the camp or run down in the route that followed.
Arrow fodder.
Yes, very much so. Unfortunately, it was arrow fodder when they weren't even being useful. So then there were 2 units of Turks Pensioneg auxiliary, effectively cavalry, which are formed, flex, average, unprotected, experienced bow. And the second unit is skilled bow. You then get to the Kipchak cavalry, which is nobles, which are formed, loose, superior, protected, unskilled javelin, short spear, shoot and charge. I have a question at some point why they are unskilled javelin. I would have thought they should be bow, but they may be influenced by the Lithuanians, I guess, who also carried bows but used javelins from horse. And then there's also something called I think it's pronounced uzes, which is a cavalry formed, flexible, average, unprotected, skilled bow unit. So that's my tugs, 9 of them. Basically, you've got 2 blocks of skilled bow. So there's 12 skilled horse archers in the army. In tugs, sorry, and 6 unarmored experienced bow. There's also 2 blocks of Kipchak horse archers, skirmishers, which are half skilled, half experienced. There's 2 blocks of 6 of those. So all in all, it's 11 UGs. If I was going to fight Richard with it, I'd be leading with the superiors fairly obviously, and probably wielding a large block of unarmored bow as not a blunt weapon, but at least try and stop him getting around my flanks and hope the superiors can actually nail jelly to a wall. That's it basically. It's probably not one I'd take to a competition, but I'd be quite keen to run that in a theme. It'd be interesting, shall we say.
It's another one that probably wants to defend, isn't it? Narrow. Oh, well, certainly in the context of fighting Mongols, for sure. Try and cut down, and as you say, then lead with your superiors who hopefully won't get shot up so much. And I think justify what you were saying about, okay, it's only 9 tugs there, but to get 11, you have to split the units up, and you probably need them as 6s to be resilient till they get to hopefully pin the horse archers up against something they can't run through. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That was where my brain went with that one, so to speak. I'd give it a whirl. What do you think, Richard? I think your Mongols would probably cut it apart, quite frankly. I just don't think it's got the command and control to stop you.
I think it would struggle a bit, certainly. I think your comment about the Kipchak nobles, I think, is probably a fair one. I think I may have got caught between 2 stools there in the classification, but perhaps they ought to have the option of bow rather than javelin, experienced bow perhaps rather than unskilled javelin. But there you go. That's a classification issue.
You've got about a month and a half till you're supposed to do the next release, Richard. So
don't I know it?
This, of course, is the period when I send you all sorts of emails about things I think should be changed.
I have to hold my hand up to that. I've been doing that as well. So
thank you, guys. Yes, I had noticed.
I think I'm blocked on his server now. But anyway,
it pops up in Outlook. Start hassling Richard. Microsoft have it coded in. Yeah, so no, I think I'd agree with Matt on his view that I'd prefer to use the Mongols against that army than that army against the Mongol. So it's so to try and avoid the Kalka River. Okay, folks. I think we've covered an awful lot there about the Great Raid with Subutai and friends. I'm not going to try and mangle Mongolian names tonight. So thank you so much to Matt for leading on that. And I think, as I said at the beginning, obviously the lists will be on the blog. But I said at the beginning we would have a bit of a retrospective on Derventio IV. So I think we shall move on to that now. I think first up, we have to say a big thank you once again to Will Denham for organising the competition, which I think we can say everybody thoroughly enjoyed. at Boards and Swords in Derby, and of course to Manny and the crew at Boards and Swords for their excellent hospitality once again. So friendly, so helpful, organising food and drink for us. It's just a great place. It made a really great atmosphere, I thought. Matt, hopefully you thought the same.
Oh, totally. It was my first time there actually, and I was.
Well,
yeah, it was first time I managed to make one of those, and it was really good. Really enjoyed myself.
Oh yeah, the overall top event, and there's another one arranged there in the first quarter or so of next year, again by Will. So I'm certainly looking forward to going back there again. So I think maybe here Matt and I can give you all a quick heads up on the lists we took, how we did in brief. I think because we've not to make the podcast too long. Richard, I'm sure, can give us some cogent comments on where we went wrong and why. To be honest, Matt, because we settled around mid-table mediocrity, I think it's fair to say. So, okay, Matt and I think we talked through the lists we took to the competition, why we took it, and maybe some bits and pieces about the games we fought. Richard can make some cogent comments about where we went right and where we went wrong with our lists, maybe even comment what he would have taken. Because I think it's fair to say, both you and I, Matt, we ended up in mid-table mediocrity territory.
Yes, we did rather, didn't we?
Although, and listeners from the previous podcast maybe remembered, we both tipped each other to finish above each other, if you see what I mean. And it boils down to I was the slightly less mediocre out of the two of us. But not by any great distance for bragging rights, I think it is fair to say.
I was hoping you were going to say that you were both correct.
That would have taken some doing. We might have had to question the scoring at that point, but obviously Will is far too competent to allow that to happen. So, yeah. And also, as well as mine and Matt's list, Hammy, who won the competition, has kindly sent over his list for us to pass on to everybody. And I think Richard is going to talk about that one. But I tell you what, I'll start off with mine, just because I'm talking at the moment. I took early Carthaginian. Just for those who don't know, this was basically a classical themed competition. So we're looking at armies more or less from the classical age. I don't have too many armies for this, but I took early Carthaginian army I painted up a couple of years ago. I really like. I've done it entirely in Zeiston figures. And for whatever reason, in my opinion, it's actually better army than the later Carthaginian, but that's just a personal opinion. Anyway, the command structure I've got, it's all instinctive generals, competent army commander, a talented and mediocre sub, and a talented ally general who is a Numidian ally. I'm only allowed coastal terrain, got poor unfortified camp. I come in at 9994 points with a PBS of 6 and a scouting of 4. The scouting of 4 is reasonably respectable in a classical period. I've got a 6 base unit of Punic chariots, formed loose, superior protected, experienced javelin, short spear, devastating chargers, melee expert, shoot and charge. Inhale. Always takes a long time to say that. A 4 base unit of companion cavalry, formed loose, average protected, unskilled javelin, short spear. They're essentially there to do a bit of skirmishing. Sacred band infantry, drilled close, superior protected, long spear, shove, shield cover. They're a bit of punch, a fair amount of punch in a way, and along with the chariots are really the only proper punch in the army. 3 8 base units of African spearmen, formed close, average protected, long spear. That's it. No shield cover, no shove. Unit of Spanish, tribal loose, average protected, impact weapon, 8. 8 Ligurians, tribal loose, average protected, experienced javelin, short spear. Experienced javelin is quite a nice one. A lot of troops like that get unskilled. And my last tug is Numidian nobles, cavalry, form flexible, average protected, experienced javelin. They've actually been downgraded from superior. And for those of us who remember back to last year, effectively that is the compromise I've had to make from this list from last year due to the points changes made mainly to the Numidian light horse, who quite correctly got more expensive. I've got 5 Sugs, 1 of Libyan javelinmen, average unprotected, experienced javelin combat shy at 6. 6 Balearic slingers, average unprotected, skilled sling, combat shy, very useful. And 3 units of aforementioned Numidian best light horse, cavalry skirmisher, average unprotected, skilled javelin, combat shy. So in many ways, the army, it's usually skirmishers, especially the Numidians, to hopefully prepare the way for the chariots and the sacred band to do their business. The African spearmen, they're solid enough. They can hold up a lot of troops. The Spanish and Ligurians give you something that can together sit in a piece of terrain if you have to, and they're not completely useless out in the open. And the Ligurians having experienced javelin is quite useful. One weakness I thought it had going into the competition, in classical competition, you can meet quite a lot of troops who are dev charger, and those African spearmen are not great against those. They can suffer. And if you meet elephants, as I did in my first game, those African spearmen are really quite vulnerable because they're formed, not drilled. So before I just give some brief stuff on the battles, I'll just throw that for Richard is already looking quite puzzled, or just trying to work out how he can be polite, perhaps.
I mean, my reaction to it is, it's an army I've not quite found clicked, and I've always struggled to figure out why. I don't know that 3 units of skirmishing light horse can achieve a great deal.
I've found they do, or they can. And three does seem to be a magic number. I've tried it with 2, because it's javelin in the shorter range. You do tend to not do so well. The 3rd unit just seems to help, at least when I use it.
Yeah, I when I've used the light horse, I've tended to use them in combination with quite good cavalry, and I've stuck with 2 in those scenarios. But
Makes sense.
I mean, it's horses for courses, as I suppose if you're riding one, you would say. And as you say, the African spearmen, they're not great against the dev charger. They're not great against elephants. And
also, they're not great against Romans, which in a classical competition can be a real pain.
Well, lots of things are not particularly good against Romans, particularly of the superior melee expert variety. But they are considerably more expensive. So yeah, I agree with, if you're going to take the chariots, take them in 6s. Those dev charger melee expert shoot and charge, but you're putting a lot of points in 2 baskets, really, the Punic chariots and the sacred band, and that means the rest of the army tends to suffer a bit. And that's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, that's fair. No, it's true. Those 2 are your punch, and if they get neutralized in any way, you're in for a long day. And it's
so how did you get neutralized?
Sorry?
So how did you get neutralized then?
Well, one against Roger Whittam's Indians, which had a good war wagons interleaved between his infantry units, some elephants, and we just bogged down, basically. It was interesting. We both had a fair amount of shooting going on, but managed to do very little. I actually blame Sid for this, because this was in the first game, and during this, Pete Entwistle and Sid were playing, and Sid just rode straight over the top of Pete in an outrageous display of dice rolling, and I just thought he sucked all the skulls out of the game I was having with Roger. That's my excuse anyway.
Yeah, I saw Roger's army composition. I felt that's an army that's picked not to lose rather than an army picked to win, and they don't do well in competitions, and they have the danger of dragging down your opponent's scores as well, I'm afraid.
I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the game. Just before I ask Matt what he thinks of my list, I'll just briefly go over the other games, which was second game was against John Munro with Galatian. And the Galatians can basically fight better than my army, and did. So, including his close formation Galatian war bands in the rough going against my loose formation troops.
Oh, ouch!
Yes, mind you, they got melee experts, so they're not.
They were the feared warriors, I presume.
He basically had
them.
Yes, he basically had an army entirely of feared warriors, and I certainly feared them. The third game against Kurt Dukes, who had a Gallic Federate Roman. I beat that, partly aided by the fact that half his army just seemed to subsist on black and white cards for a huge amount of the game. And I should say at this point, Kurt just took it completely his stride. In fact, until the end of the game, I didn't know how bad his cards were. He was so unflappable. But yeah, and the last game was against Pete Riley with his Ancient Brits, and yeah, it's good, but we ran out of time basically. And I think fourth game, and we were mid-table mediocrity, and I was called away for a number of umpire calls because that always happens in the last game. But it was fun, and all sorts of things. But anyway, Matt, what was your view on my army?
Well, I have to say I like it, but there again, I've got a Syracusan Greek, which is almost the same. You know, barring the chariots, it's pretty much the same style list. I mean, I rely on Gallic mercenaries rather than the chariots to give me the other punch unit. But no, I like it.
Presumably, you don't have Numidians in your Syracusan Greek army either.
Yeah, they're allowed a Numidian ally.
Are they? Oh, okay.
What's his name? Who invaded Africa?
Yes.
Oh, it's that army. Okay, yeah. Now I'm with you.
Yes, so it almost is the same. I just don't get the chariots, unfortunately.
Yes. Fair enough. Gathocles, was it?
Something like that.
Yeah, that. Yeah.
It is, yes. So move on to your army, because I have posted tales of my battles on my blog, so won't dwell too long on those.
Well, yes, Parthians. What can I say? Right. I went with Indo-Parthian rather than pure Parthian because Parthian just doesn't work. Well, where have I heard that before? Basically, pure Parthian doesn't work because it has no skirmish troops. It has no delaying troops. Sorry, it has skirmish troops, but it does not have any delaying troops. It has no flexible cavalry or loose order cavalry that you can go park in front of an enemy unit. So I went with Indo-Parthian because it's allowed a Kushan ally. Yeah, all right. My list is a bit special, and I'm quite happy to put my hand up to that one. So basically, what you've got a talented army commander, a talented Kushan ally, competent instinctive, and a mediocre instinctive subgenerals. They're all instinctive. You've got 2 blocks of 6 superior cataphracts, which are tribal close, armored horse, fully armored, long spear, dev chargers, shove. And then you've got 3 blocks of average cataphracts, which are in blocks of 4. Add to that 2 Kushan horse archer tugs, which are formed, flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow, 2 blocks of 6. Then you've got almost as many sugs. You've got the experienced javelin combat shies I can never pronounce it. Is it Cantabrian?
Yes.
Thank you. For some reason, I always overthink that one. Sorry, Richard, what's that?
From Cantabria in Spain.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Learn something new every day. Thank you. Then there's Kushan horse archers, which are downgraded to poor, unprotected, unskilled bow, combat shy. 4 of them, basically, they gave me enough to get me an extra scouting point. And then you've got 4 internal horse archer units. Again, blocks of 6, combat shy, half of Cantabrian. So that's the list basically. 13 Uggs, break of 4, scouting of 5. As I say, the reason I went with the Indo-Parthian was because then I had something to delay with, because basically I was relying on pushing 5 units of cataphracts down somebody's throat and hoping they did the job while skirmishing with all the light horse. So I'm open to abuse. Go on, let me have it.
It's to me, the problem is it's a one-trick pony, in that it's a Cantabrian punch. You're not going to win a game purely by your horse archer capability. And I don't like those 4s of average. I found they break too easily. Taking them as 6s means you're down to 6 tugs. Then you're 3 to break. That's even scarier. That's my problem with it. I find it doesn't work. To me, the Parthian that does work is actually the one that has almost no cataphracts and relies on the horse archery. And I take just the single tug of cataphracts. But that's a different beast, certainly. I'll accept that.
I agree with Richard on the 4s of average cataphracts, especially in this army. Your cataphracts probably win or lose it. I think I'd have been tempted to have 2 6s of the average, and that's actually split the Kushan horse archers into 3 4s, and just accept that they're almost filler. Your cataphracts are going to do. You got 2 superiors there, 2 superiors and 2 averages in 6s. It's still a pretty hefty punch. It's I mean, I must admit, I have never been able to think of a Parthian type army that I would want to use.
I have to say, if it wasn't for the fact that I was trying to see if I could get a Parthian one to work, I can do a much better armor by using early Sassanid Persian with the same principles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because your cataphracts are formed, your horse archers are internal, but that's by the by.
Yeah.
What I will say though is I almost have not had that much fun with an army at a competition than I had with this one. Even though I had 4 mediocre scores, every single game was thoroughly enjoyable against great opponents. It's an army that makes you think. And
who did you
play?
play?
You had to think. I played in the first round. I played Roger Pitfield with his Imperial Romans. I lost focus. Fair enough. I got so embroiled in trying to work out what I was doing with the light horse and stuff. I just didn't put enough zap into the cataphracts. So it was an irritating game in the sense that I just wasn't on form. But yeah, great game. It really was. I think I didn't have a single light horse left, and I think half of his were dead, and a couple of his. Yeah, it was brilliant. It was a really good game. It was crazy, but it was a really good game. Then round 2 was Hammy, the eventual winner.
Mm-hmm.
He sucker punched me in his deployment, quite frankly. I totally outscouted him and I still fell for it. So again, I told you I was going to have a bad Saturday, and I really did. But no, it was one of those nip and tuck game. A lot of almost psychological warfare with the cards being discarded and stuff. And yeah, really enjoyable. I had no problems losing badly to him on that one. It was, I think it was 10-15. I think that was the 10 for me. Yeah, great game, really good. And then Sunday was Stephen Steads with his Thraco-Roman with Roman Ally, which is almost by. And again, brilliant game. Really enjoyed it. We ran out of time. I think he was about a charge off of my camp, and I think I was close to his. I'd blown through one flank, he'd blown through my flank, and it was again, that was a really good game. And then I thought, I was going to say fought Mr. Munro's Galatians more, sort of slowed him down for a bit. I made an error in deployment, which basically forced me to put all my cataphracts into his infantry and left his cavalry free to just muller my light horse, which was such is life as it goes. And he flattened me. I put a very big hole in his infantry. I mean, there were, but it wasn't enough. So again, good game. So yes, barreled in, I think, almost precisely into the middle of the table with that.
Okay, Richard, do you want to just talk through Hammy's army?
So Hammy, the eventual winner, as I understand it.
Yes, indeed.
Took a Skiri army of 380 CE. So this is the a Skiri army that, along with the Huns and the Carpi, or Carpodaci as they're known in the sources by this time, wreaked some merry havoc till I think my history remembers they got rather badly mauled in the end. So we've got 2 lots of Skiri cavalry, form loose average protected short spear melee expert in 6s, 4 units of Huns, 2 upgraded to be unprotected skilled bow, the other 2 remaining unprotected experienced bow, all melee expert, all form flexible cavalry. Along with that, we've got the Carpi ally, which is 2 units of warriors with unskilled javelin, short spear, shoot and charge, tribal loose average protected. They're in 6s. The warriors with falcons are in a 9. They're the average protected devastating charge of melee expert, and a unit of 6 nobles who are the same but superior. Along with that, we've got 2 units of unprotected poor experienced bow combat shy archers, who basically want somewhere to hide away from the main battle, I would imagine, and a unit of another unit of Skiri cavalry by the looks of it. So we had 3 of the 6s, along with a unit of skirmishing archers, just ordinary 9 of average unprotected experienced bow combat shy. On first sight, nothing particularly magical. A mediocre instinctive army commander and 2 talented allies with the competent instinctive sub. So you've got 2 commanders for the Skiri with 5 cards covering the 3 cavalry and the 2 archers, and you've got the 2 talented each covering 4 units with the for the 2 allies. PBS of 5, so you're going to only be struggling the PBS stage, but a scouting of 4, so that's quite respectable. As I say, at first sight, doesn't look particularly much, but I can imagine played well, it's actually quite a dangerous combination. You've got the skilled bow cavalry that can skirmish. They're flexible, so you can throw them out on a wing and cause some havoc there. Use the cavalry in combination with the Carpi. I'd imagine that could do quite a lot of damage. You've got a tug break point of 7. You've got plenty of opportunity to get stuck in. It reminds me actually of the armies that Alistair Harley took in the more early days of MeG competitions and did very well with it as well. So perhaps not at first sight the army that you think might win a MeG competition, but an army that handled well, I think, is very dangerous, would be my view.
It was.
Well, he was. So it must have been. Yeah. No, it's an army where the actual army, it is the Skiri, is just the sort of glue that holds together the 2 allied contingents in a way.
Yeah. The Skeri were one of these Eastern Germanic tribes that sort of were influenced a bit by the Goths and sat on the edge of the Pannonian Plain, I think, from memory.
Yep, I think it is. Yeah, but it's definitely one of those, in the hands of a player who's worked out how to use it, it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's because I like you, Richard. I think somebody had plonked that in front of me at the start of the competition. I'd have said, okay, interesting. I can see it can do well in a couple of games, but it'll be mid-table mediocrity. And then it wasn't. So that's
what makes so interesting.
This is it, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if you get any last thoughts on that, Matt.
It seems to be a bit of a theme for this year. There's various armies that have appeared, and people have gone, it's okay, and it's done really well. But no, Hammy, he understood its composition, and it was a pleasure to play, actually, and it's given me some ideas.
Yeah. Well, just to sort of just wrap this Derventio bit, just go down the top few armies that were there. Hammy, obviously, Skiri won it. Sid with Asiatic Successor came second, but Sid's always there and thereabouts. Lee Sanders was third with Spartan Slave Revolt. Graham Wilmot fourth, Dacian. Dave Parish fifth. Classical Indian Mauryan. Pete Entwistle, Turk Lingi. Then John Munro Galatian. Paul Cummings Hunnick. And then Ray with his Numidians. So, had a real mix up at the top. And then, there were lots of other armies used: Republican Romans, Imperial Romans, Ancient Brits, Gothic. There was another Spartan slave revolt. So, it was a mix. So, and bring up the rear, Simon Cooper with Seleucid in his first competition. I think I believe he enjoyed himself. He's looking forward to coming back again. So I think, as I said, it just provided a really good competition all round. So just aware that time is ticking on, and perhaps we should bring this podcast to a close here. Although I did hint at the beginning, Richard, just anything from that SOA conference that you went to that might prove of interest in the future for Megas?
Yeah, well, just very briefly mention I put on a game of MeG Pacto using 28mm troops on a 6-foot by 4-foot table. Spartans versus Athenians. I've been developing a Peloponnesian campaign based on the Death or Victory board game and the map in that, and that got 6 players and got quite a bit of interest. We had 3 excellent presentations. One by Dr. Simon Elliott on Rome's Lost Legion, the 9th Hispania, going through the 4 theories that are, very briefly, that it was lost in northern Britain, the Eagle of the 9th. A theory that it was lost in Germany, less likely. The only evidence for its presence in Germany is actually a vexillium or detachment of the Legion, not the Legion itself. That it was lost in Cappadocia in 160. We know a Roman legion was lost in Cappadocia in 160. We don't know which one it was, but unfortunately there's no evidence to suggest that the 9th was ever there. And the final theory, which is fairly recent, is that it may have actually revolted against Hadrian. And there is some evidence of skulls found in the Walbrook that were decapitated, the top of the head, which is a Batavian, and we know there were Batavians in Hadrian's army, and it's just possible that the legion was basically written out of the history books for its revolt against Hadrian. If you wanted me to take a bet, I'd still say that it was lost in the north of England's the most likely. But unless something new gets uncovered archaeologically, I think that's the best we can say on that one. So maybe a theme about Roman legions and Roman defeats, perhaps. Secondly, there was an excellent presentation by Simon McDowell on the Battle of Adrianopol, which will be the Society of Ancients Battle Day battle next year, which I hope to put on in MEG. And maybe that will be a theme around possibly that time for the podcast. The third presentation was on medieval leadership and what the medieval sources say about leadership, which, quite frankly, you could include in a modern business course and probably run an MBA course based on it, because everything you would expect in a modern business course actually seems to get mentioned in medieval sources, which was very interesting and entertaining. As well as that, there were lots of other games played in a whole variety of different rule sets, and an excellent pre-dinner speech from Ben Kane, the fiction author, who talked about his trek across Hadrian's Wall dressed as a Roman triarii, from which I picked up the advice: if you're going to trek across Hadrian's Wall, don't do it dressed as a Roman triarii. Yeah, a good entertaining weekend had at Madingley Hall near Cambridge, which was an excellent venue, I must say.
Okay, well, yeah, I think at some stage next year we can definitely do the Adrianopol one. Fit in with the battle day. It's an interesting battle, and we've not really covered that bit of late Roman yet. So, okay, thank you, Richard. I think as I said, now we've talked for quite a while now. Hopefully, it's been of real interest to people. Army lists for your viewing, and any comments on that. As I said, I would be interested in hearing back just on the slightly different format this time, if it worked or it didn't, because ultimately what you, the listener, want, we want you to be interested in. So I think that the only thing I'll say before we go is next MEG competition is, of course, Warfare, now held at Ascot. It's moved from Reading, where it used to be, and our theme there is biblical. So we expect to see loads of chariots and other troops as well, of course. So hopefully the nice new venue allows a bit more room than we've traditionally had. But so hopefully see a good number of you there, and no doubt we shall be covering it in some shape or form in a future podcast. To say thank you very much as ever to Matt for doing all that history work, Richard for all the cogent comments as ever, and of course all that he ever does around MEG. So at that point, until next time, thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.